So I don't see it kind of disappearing overnight like that. That just, I don't see that happening. And there are still, if you read the blog post that the Silverlight team put out, where they talked about Silverlight in an HTML5 world, I mean, the basic thing is that the web has always kind of bounced back and forth between plugins and no plugins, right? So in the early days, suddenly plugins were going to do everything. And this is probably the 95 to 97 era. And then we realized, well, gee, that didn't really pan out because plugins can introduce a lot of problems. Not everyone has them. Then you have to account for that. Then everything kind of goes to this anti-plugin state. And then somebody does something that's innovative. I think YouTube was really a big win for Flash. It's probably the most successful Flash-based site out there in the history. Now we see finally HTML5 has a video spec in it, but there's still a lot of problems with HTML5's video tag. The codecs are not defined, so I can have a video that posted that uses, we'll say, codec X, but your browser only stands codec Y, so it'll fail. It won't work. So
HTML5 would be the industry standard. I mean, that's also a gain for the HTML5 over Silverlight. Like if I do PHP and if I know HTML5, I'm still good to go.
Yes, you're good to go under certain conditions. So the point was that HTML5 will be an industry standard, unlike a proprietary binary thing like Silverlight or Flash. Yeah, I mean, that's a valid argument. But what I'm saying is with respect for the multimedia aspects of it, if I have something coded in H.264, H.264 is not supported on all browsers with HTML5. So I could make Frankie browser 2012, right? And I can support HTML5 to the spec, to the letter. But if I don't have the H.264 protocol supported in my browser, then that video is not going to work. So you as a site owner are going to have to pick the least common denominator of formats, what's the most popular, or have multiple versions of your content. Either one's not really a great scenario. So that standards are great. Everyone should have one, right? So you know, it's a really good video that one of the sessions from Mix called HTML5 for Skeptics, and that was the session that really kind of changed my mind about being very anti-HTML5 to saying that, you know, there's room for everybody. I highly recommend watching it because it's probably the most fair, reasonable assessment. Because the trade journals, the trade press, each one has their own agenda, which is usually creating controversy, so they increase their traffic so they can charge more for ads. But the gentleman who spoke, I forget his name, but he built the Hard Rock. He made a living off Silverlight for the last 3-4 years, and you know, he concedes that neither one's going away. I mean, it's going to be more. And I think having more tools in our tool belt is a good thing. Hopefully that answers your question with a minimum amount of spin. And, I mean, there used to be a sign on one of the buildings at Microsoft headquarters that said, "Those who ship win." And you know, if you don't ship, chances are you're not going to make any money. And if their company you work for or agency you work for doesn't produce something, and you're probably not going to be around. So ultimately, I mean, it does come down to what your audience is. What are you trying to accomplish? Phones have a really good HTML5 story, but desktops, I mean, or you know, laptops, it's not so clear cut. I mean, my mom, not to pick on her, still calls her browser her Netscape. So, and you know, how long have they been gone? So, I mean, it really depends on what you're doing. And the biggest piece of advice that really came out of Mix was, you know, look at your browser stats. You know, if 0.00001 of your visitors use IE6, then maybe you can not worry about that anymore. But on the internet, you have a lot more control. So chances are you know what's on your end users or your audience's desktop. And it's a lot easier to push out a plugin than upgrade their browsers, because usually there's a lot more to that. It's not a clear-cut answer. I mean, I think people are looking for Microsoft to say, if X, do Y, if A, do B. We're not about that. We're about providing the tools that let you be productive, that let you be successful. Then you can pick and choose what you want to do. So hopefully that answers your question. I mean, it is the gorilla in the room right now. Any discussion in Mix was kind of like, Silverlight developers were kind of like, oh, it's HTML5 thing. HTML5 people are like, that Silverlight thing or that Flash thing. I don't see the need for the tension that there is. I think the more tools in your tool belt, the more successful you'll be. And the more tools you master, the more successful you can be. That's really what the game is about. So this is the IE10 test drive site. You can go and you download this. It won't interfere with your default install of whatever version of IE you're currently using. Here's a really neat demo. Okay, forgot about that music at the end. But keep in mind, this here is no Flash, no Silverlight. It's all HTML. And that's how many seconds it took, and that's how many objects it rendered. The real challenge for the IE team, I think, was if everybody's going to, let's assume it's possible, everybody can take a standard and follow it to the exact letter, all the same. Everybody can kind of get around the campfire and sing Kumbaya. Let's assume that's going to happen. How can you differentiate yourself? And the real way to do that is performance. And so that's really what IE10, IE9 is really going to go for. The ability to do this at speeds that other browsers can't match. So that if you're a consumer, you're going to see your computer much more efficient on IE. That's really what they're doing here. I don't have Chrome or any other browser installed here, but you wouldn't get that high numbers. You wouldn't get this done in 10 seconds. So this is Fishbowl. And this really isn't a practical demo. I mean, I overheard somebody say, who cares about fish? The point here is to see how many you can have and what your frames per second are. So I have 2,000 fish that are individually rendered in there, and I'm still getting 13 frames per second. We can take a look at my okay, that noise is annoying. So we could drop it down to 1. I will say that it's a fairly complicated animation. There's water, there's a frame, there's a mask, all sorts of layers here that make that complicated. If I go to auto, I've tested on this machine. It maxes out around 400 or 500 fish, depending on what else I have running. But you'll see, if you look at my CPU usage, it's still fairly low. So chances are your business application or your website isn't going to have fish running around on it. Maybe if you have a pet store type thing. It's not really practical, but it does show you what's possible as far as media experiences. If I unmute it, you can hear the music, the sound of that again. So, I mean, this really isn't so much for today, I think. This is really more for the day when the vast majority of people have HTML5 browsers on their desktop. Here's an interesting layout type example. So I can change this and it automatically goes that. But watch, once I shrink to this size, it actually really shrinks down. So that's an example of a clever layout. This lets you build gradients in CSS, and you can kind of see what's possible with this. A lot of hacks were in the past to do this. So I mean, it really opens up a lot more options for web developers to sneak the stuff in to their applications. You could have a better layout. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. This is one I particularly like. So let's look for so this is showing you, this is all HTML5. There's no flash, there's no anything like that. This has the dev tools in here. And this isn't really meant to be a primer on HTML5, although I suspect maybe we have a future event like that. But you can get an idea as far as looking at the script and what it takes to build something like this. So one really cool thing you can do in, how many people here have heard of site pinning? I'll drag this icon down to my taskbar in Windows 7. So Josh Holmes is another developer evangelist, and he showed me how to do this, and it's very, very easy to add to your site. So I now have his, okay, that's a little weird. So it's a picture of his face on my taskbar. So imagine that was your company brand or your agency brand. So you can actually have that, you can mouse over it, and that's him. If I right mouse click here, I have a list of tasks that I can do. So you can actually integrate with the Windows 7 jump lists, much like you can do here, the Windows 7 applications. So if I go here, I click on that, it takes me to that page. Another developer evangelist has this on her blog. So if I drag this down here, I now have a branded experience with the colors. I can change the colors on that, and I can right mouse click here. I can see her on the web, her on Twitter, Facebook, the events that she's doing, and other sites that she wants to promote. I'm in the middle of redesigning my site, so I didn't want to mess it up too much. So I even have this little bandwagon where I can drag that on. And all right, I copied and pasted her code, but you can actually have custom icons, and you can really integrate and have a much better experience. Another fun example is, how many people here know about Channel 9? Okay. Now, after night, everyone will, right? Assuming you're awake. I will drag this down to the taskbar, and I now have Channel 9. And you'll notice that actually the back and forward buttons and the Chrome actually have the colors of Channel 9. So how do you do that? Aren't you just curious to know? So how do we do this? So what I have here is we have it in just meta tags. There's no scripting, although you can script it if you want a more complicated experience. So I have meta tags here that can define what goes on my jump task list. That's the name. The content actually consists of 3 parameters here. So I have the name, what I want it to look like. I have the action URL that I want it to go to, and I have the URI to the icon. How easy is that? So you see Channel 9 does something very similar. They have this. There's also Slacker Radio has a something, so does Community Megaphone.